Greetings, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the 29th edition of the Educational Leadership Forum focused on transforming education for human and planetary flourishing. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time today out of your busy schedule to join us. Your commitment to this discussion reflects a shared responsibility that we all feel towards shaping the many futures of education. My name is Aaryan Salman, and I'm the host for this Fireside Chat, which marks the beginning of a series of events as part of the 29th Educational Leadership Forum being hosted over the next 3 weeks. For those of you who are new to the Educational Leadership Forum, the ELF, or the Educational Leadership Forum, is a gathering of leading experts, practitioners, and educational leaders from across top institutions and organizations dedicated to shaping the many futures of education. This edition of the ELF focuses on a critical theme and features stimulating formats of events, including a panel discussion, an inspiring lecture from a distinguished global expert, workshops from educational leaders, and an engaging fireside chat with a thought leader. So we're very grateful to have had the privilege of hosting the distinguished Randy E. Bennett, a globally respected leader in the field of educational assessments and innovation. Randy holds the Norman O. Fredrickson Chair in Assessment Innovation at the ETS Research Institute. He has been at the forefront of assessment design, integrating cognitive science, technology, and measurement of design equitable assessment approaches. Now, his recent paper titled Towards a Theory of Socioculturally Responsive Assessments challenges us to confront a powerful question. What if assessments were responsive to diverse social and cultural contexts in which students learn? His paper lays out an early theory and foundational design principles for personalized assessments that acknowledge identity, context, and the complexity of learning itself. As we begin the 29th edition of this forum, we do sit with the intention of rethinking and reimagining assessments for individual and societal flourishing. And who better to help us set the tone than someone who has deeply shaped the world, the way how the world thinks about assessment. Let us welcome Dr. Randy E. Bennett. So a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to take part in this education forum for the Global Citizenship Foundation. So your first question.
So for decades, we've been hearing about assessment of learning, assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and even assessment as a tool for bidirectional feedback. Now, in your paper, you mention a growing loss of faith in traditional assessment methodologies. And you also call for assessments that promote deeper learning. So in your opinion, what do you think has changed in the past few years that's driving educators to explore alternatives to traditional assessment methods? And most importantly, what should the role and purpose of assessments be in formal education?
That's a great question. And before answering, let me provide some what I think is important background. I think we should first be clear that traditional tests are used for many different purposes: school accountability, university admissions, advanced placement, and national education monitoring among them. The tests used for some of those purposes are more contentious than the ones used for other purposes. Second, we should be clear about what the term traditional testing means. To me, it means standardized testing, which in its strictest form involves treating all students equally by giving them the same questions in the same format, under the same conditions, scored in the same way. Such tests are often multiple choice, but they don't need to be. Other standardized tests include performance tasks of many different types. Among the more contentious purposes for which standardized tests have been used is school accountability. In the U.S., the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 dramatically increased the use of standardized tests in K-12 education. The intention was to reduce gaps in performance among socioeconomic and racial ethnic groups, gaps in achievement. NCLB, that law, and subsequent federal actions required states, among other things, to establish content and performance standards annually test students against those standards, and use that test performance for teacher compensation, promotion, tenure, and removal decisions. The theory of action underlying those policies appeared to be that identifying poorly performing schools and holding their educators accountable would spur teaching and learning aligned to curriculum standards for all students, thereby reducing gaps. So the fact that standardized testing in K-12 schools has dramatically increased since 2001, that its use has been principally for school and staff evaluation rather than for instructional improvement, and that sanctions were attached to it, punishments, has naturally led K-12 teachers in particular to be wary of standardized tests used for school accountability and to look for other uses of assessment that are more facilitative of their everyday jobs, which is to help students move learning forward.
Thank you. So my next question to you is, many teachers, like as you also shared, are working hard to create inclusive classrooms. Now, how does the idea of, say, socioculturally responsive assessments build onto these efforts in how we measure student learning, if you have to focus on that question?
Socioculturally responsive assessment derives from the practice of culturally responsive and related forms of teaching, as pioneered by such scholars as Gloria Ladson-Billings and Geneva Gay. In those forms of teaching, instructors use the cultural frames of reference brought to school by their kids who come from different backgrounds as a bridge to learning the content that is valued by the school. So, for example, one of the chapters in our new open access book, Socioculturally Responsive Assessment, is co-authored by a Native American teacher who taught the physics of heat transfer in the context of the teepee, a tent-like structure traditionally used in her indigenous community. One of the principles of SCRA is to bring such context into assessment, that is, to pose questions in contexts that are familiar to students so that they can more readily make connections between their experience and school learning. In the case I just mentioned, the teacher then moves the kids to considering heat transfer in more mainstream structures, for example, wood frame buildings, helping them to generalize the underlying concepts.
So, Randy, to help the delegates understand this a bit better, could you define or provide a working definition of what exactly do we mean by, say, socio-culturally responsive assessments? If there's a quick, easy way of helping a teacher understand what exactly this would mean uh, in the context.
Sure. In the article, I describe SCRA in terms of 5 assessment design principles. Those assessment design principles essentially define SCRA. First, use problems that connect to student culture, background, interest, and identity, because such problems are more likely to activate relevant prior knowledge in those students and likely to be more motivating to them. I gave the example earlier of using the teepee to teach heat transfer to Native American students because that's a culturally significant building structure to which students can connect. They can connect their prior knowledge and they can be more motivated because it's something that is from their identity. Second, allow for multiple modes of expression and forms of representation, because some modes and some forms are more common to the ways of knowing of some individuals than are other modes and forms. Some students may be able to show their content knowledge orally, whereas others may be more capable and comfortable when writing. Third, encourage deeper learning through assessment design, because kids from poorly resourced schools are less likely to be exposed to deeper learning than are their counterparts in more well-funded schools. Fourth, adapt the assessment to personal characteristics. which goes beyond presenting culturally relevant problems and beyond allowing for multiple modes of expression and representation, to encouraging agency and affording choice in the assessment. Give assessments and assignments that allow students to select among problems instead of always asking everyone to answer the same questions. Last, characterize assessment results as reflecting an interaction among the tasks we present, the conditions under which they're taken, and what the student brings to those tasks in terms of background, interest, competencies, and opportunities to learn. Performance is conditional on all of those things rather than being an attribute of the individual that necessarily holds across all tasks, all situations, and all occasions. So that's the essence of socioculturally responsive assessment.
So, as you can see, your paper is grounded in the U.S. context and in the context of large-scale assessments. And as you shared these 5 provisional design principles, they almost seem like universal design for assessment that could also complement, say, universal design for learning. Is this a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, I think so. Universal design for assessment, if you think of it generally, shares many of the ideas with SCRA, and SCRA is in part based on universal design for assessment. So you're noticing a similarity is certainly appropriate.
Thank you. So you shared this example, or you illustrated the example of, say, AP Art and Design portfolio to bring to life the principles that you spoke about. Now, what are some of? I mean, so is there what do you call? Okay, let me rephrase this. So, how do you think educators can bring these principles into practice in other subjects, like, say, for example, maths or science, which are generally considered to be rigid or less flexible than, say, art, other methodologies that you have? So, uh, are there any ideas that you could share with us, or are there any examples or stories where, teachers have implemented these principles on the ground?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned one with respect to heat transfer, which is science. So that was a good example of how to implement SCRA in a science context, right? So take a science concept and think of ways to connect that science concept to the background, the lived experience, the cultural identities of the students that you're working with. What from their lived experience would allow them to connect heat transfer or any other science concept or mathematical concept to what it is that you want them to learn. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. So you rightly mentioned the role of teachers and the significant role that they have in making more responsive assessment models, or adapting to more responsive assessment models. Now, considering in a lot of contexts, including in the United States, you have time constraints, heavy workload, and limited resources. How do you see this being panned out? What are the prerequisites that you think, whether it's at the district level or at the federal level, or even at at an individual level? What are the things that we need to be able to have as a minimum for us to be able to apply something as meaningful as the 5 principles that you've already shared with us?
That's a really good question. In the U.S., roughly 80% of public school teachers are Caucasian, and the vast majority are middle class. However, the majority of our student population is of color and is eligible for free and reduced price lunch, an indicator of socioeconomic status. So there's an obvious background misalignment between our student and our teacher populations. Our teachers need professional development and support First, in understanding who their students are, what their ways of knowing are likely to be. That is how they make sense of the world. How their linguistic backgrounds, because many of them are second language speakers of English, affect learning. What their cultural identities and practices are, and what is meaningful and relevant to them. Teachers need professional development and support in how to use situations that are familiar and meaningful to their students for assessment and instruction. That use is key to socioculturally responsive assessment and to culturally relevant and related approaches to teaching. Teachers need development and support in how to bring into assessment and instruction references to historical figures, artists, celebrities, authors, and politicians from their students' cultural communities. Incorporating those references can help students make a connection to the competencies that are being valued by the school. Such references help students see themselves in the assessment, and if the references are not from their culture, help them learn about the cultures of others. This is the mirrors and windows metaphor that's often cited in the literature on culturally responsive and related approaches to teaching. So that is an important foundation that we need to build. That's a prerequisite for moving forward effectively in the classroom with SCRA.
As a follow-up to that, how can, what are some practical ways, or how can teachers connect to and value, say, for example, you talk about uh, a student's experience, culture, and identity in, say, day-to-day assessments. So what are some of the ways in which a teacher can incorporate these three ideas that you've also spoken about in the paper? Uh,
Well, one way to incorporate them is to begin to use AI. AI can be used, generative AI in particular, very effectively to personalize questions to the interests, identities, and backgrounds of students. My colleague, for example, Burju Arslan, has created a demo in which the students can enter into uh, the generative AI module an indication of their interest in terms of a phrase or a word. And the generative AI will then produce a test question that is contextualized in that with respect to that interest. So, for example, if I'm interested in baseball and the teacher wants to test me my knowledge of linear equations with one variable, the Gen AI will give me a problem in baseball that calls for me to apply a linear equation in one variable. And the same exact, mathematically exact question can be presented in many different contexts, depending upon what it is the student is interested in and enters. So
thank
that's
you.
one way,
All right,
one very simple way.
that brings me to this question that, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Now we're moving more and more towards, say, AI. So as somebody who's been in the field of assessments and educational innovation, what are some of the things that you think, potential challenges or concerns that you think educators should be mindful of when, say, using these technologies for assessments? So what's your take on this?
Oh, well, that's a very important question. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is often bias, the potential for bias. AI models are trained, and they're trained on data sets. And whatever biases are inherent in those data sets will be inherited by the AI model. So if the data set that is used for training is not representative of the students in the population with which that AI application will be used, then biases will occur. So that's a very significant issue. Uh, Bias can also come from other sources. It can come from the AI developers themselves. And if you know anything about AI developers, they are not representative demographically of the US school population. The two populations are very different demographically. And that difference may cause AI developers to unintentionally be insensitive to the needs of that public school population. A second major issue with AI is defensibility, because in the end, certainly for high stakes assessments, it's going to be the assessment agency and the sponsor, the test sponsor, that will be held accountable for any personalizations that are given by AI to individual students. Not every student may feel that the personalization they received was appropriate for them and may therefore decide to challenge their scores. And you can think of the same thing happening in the classroom context, where the teacher is using AI to generate problems for students, and the generated problems don't necessarily fit the interests or the identities of the students or some of the students, and those students feel as if they've been disadvantaged. The problem with AI models, at least many of them, is that they're inscrutable. They are black boxes, so that it's difficult, if not impossible, to understand how the model got from the characteristics given to it about the student to the personalization that was produced. That's leading to the field of that led to the emergence of the field of explainable AI, which should help us in creating approaches to AI that are more understandable and therefore easier to defend, because we can understand how they get from the characteristics to the problems that they generate for students.
Thank you. So coming back to, say, socioculturally responsive assessments, now what do you think are some common misconceptions that you have encountered about them? And Anisa, like, if it'd be nice if you can address some of these that you think are misconceptions.
Perhaps the most common misconception is that by changing the measures so that minoritized groups have a more valid opportunity to demonstrate competency, SCRE lowers standards for those groups. As I heard someone recently say, no one wants to fly on an airplane with a pilot or have surgery from a physician. Certified by a test personalize the contexts that are aligned with their interests when the contexts that they may face in the air or in the operating room are different. I think there are two responses to that misconception. First, at issue is not whether different competencies should be addressed or assessed for different individuals or different groups, but how the methods and the context of assessment questions should be adjusted to account for individual characteristics that might otherwise introduce irrelevant factors for an individual into the assessment. If an individual can demonstrate competency through the method of oral presentation, for example, should the inability to show that same competency on a multiple choice test necessarily be disqualifying, particularly if the occupation or profession in question doesn't consider the selected response form of expression to be critical in the practice of that occupation or profession? The second response I would give is that personalizing assessment by matching questions to the interests, background, and identity of the student does indeed run the risk of over-predicting what that individual might be able to do in contexts in which they're not interested, don't identify, or are unfamiliar. To handle that problem, we might match problems to the student for part of the assessment to estimate their competency under optimal conditions. Then for the remainder of the assessment, we might try to systematically mismatch problems to the student's background, interest, and identity. That is, give them some problems in which they're not interested, they don't identify, and they're not familiar, to estimate competency under non-optimal conditions. This method should provide the teacher both a better sense of the bounds of student competency, that is, where the student can succeed and where the student has more difficulty, because the student who can deal with both mismatched and matched tasks is arguably in a different place instructionally than one who can only handle matched tasks. So there's not only a sense of the bounds of competency, but also some instructional implications. That is, the student who can do both is different from the student who can only do one and not the other.
That's a very interesting take. That reminds me of your fifth principle, where you focus on this idea of how we can represent assessment results. So, my question to you is basically, how can teachers or say school leaders think about engaging with assessment results or representing assessment results in a way that takes into what do you call diverse factors and also supports student growth and the overall outcomes? So I'm looking forward to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Most importantly, stay as close as possible to the assessment itself in your characterizations of student performance. If a student scored poorly on a persuasive essay task about a political issue taken on computer under timed conditions, that doesn't mean the student is necessarily a poor writer. The student might have done considerably better writing on paper under untimed conditions on another topic or in another writing genre. So I would suggest experimenting and encouraging students to experiment with varying those factors so that they understand what they do well and where they need to improve, what the conditions are that allow them to do well, and the conditions excuse me, and what the conditions are that are impediments. Does changing the mode or extending the timing improve writing? Does writing on a topic closer to the student's experience help? Once it's clear what helps, build upon that base to improve writing competency in the needed areas as appropriate.
Thank you, Randy, for that one. So, following up on what do you call the practical implications of your model, uh, can you share a strategy or two for teachers to genuinely engage or perhaps like connect with students' diverse interest, experience, and cultural identities on the ground in the sense like what are one or two things that they should be mindful of while they're engaging in like an activity which includes individuals' identities, their culture, as well as like their lived experiences. So what are some things that teachers should be mindful of while they're designing it?
Uh, well, the first thing to be mindful of is that you can't be mindful of things that you don't understand. So the first thing, the first step is to learn as much as you can about the students in your class. Learn as much as you can about their identities, backgrounds, cultural practices, lived experiences, interests, so that you can begin to understand what kinds of activities, what kinds of contexts will be motivating and meaningful to them. I think that's the most important thing that teachers need to do. Once they have that deeper understanding of their students, I think it will be much simpler and easier to begin connecting activities for assessment and instruction that are meaningful to them. It will also be easier to interpret their responses because their responses are in part caused by their interests, background, identities, and lived experiences. So that interpretation will be richer and more meaningful if it's grounded in that kind of knowledge.
Thank you, Randy. Now, looking at a bigger picture than just an individual teacher, so what would an ideal roadmap for, say, piloting and embedding these principles in at a district or a school level look like in what would be a good starting point? Say, for example, a school wants to apply the model that you have created. So, what is that starting point for them? And are there any quick wins or ideas that we can look at that could accelerate this process for, say, a school or a district?
Yeah, so I think a good starting point is is to do at the district level what I just suggested the teacher do, and that is for the instructional staff in the district and the administrative staff too to do the work. Excuse me, to do the work, do the work.
Some water, Randy.
Yeah.
Okay.
To do the work needed to develop the knowledge base that can provide that foundation for understanding who it is that is coming to school. Because in most districts, there's going to be a difference in the population demographics between the teachers, or at least in many districts, between the teachers and the students. So it's essential to develop that deeper understanding of who those students are. Second, uh, use performance tasks to the extent practical, because performance tasks can allow students, if they're well designed, to bring their backgrounds, identities, and interests to their responses. Performance tasks can help kids connect in more meaningful ways to the content of the school if they're designed to be open enough that they allow kids to bring themselves into the responses. The AP Art and Design example in the SCRA paper that you mentioned is really the most, probably the best illustration of that, of kids, by virtue of the open-ended nature of the assessment, bringing their identities to the expression of their art and demonstrating competency through their identity, or at least using their identity in the demonstration of competency. That can be done in other subjects. For example, in another advanced placement assessment made by the College Board called AP Research, students have to do a research project. And with the teacher, they choose what project to do. And that project can be about anything that is of interest to them, something that has to do with their cultural identity. The project could be about if a kid is interested in researching bias. That could be the research project. If a kid is interested in learning more about environmental contamination because they live in a neighborhood in which there is more environmental contamination than in other neighborhoods, they can do a research project about that. So they can bring their interest, their identity, their lived experience to that research project. For such things to be successful, teachers need training in how to help design performance assessments that will function effectively. That is, that will help reveal what it is students know and can do, and help teachers learn how to score them in ways that will allow for effective and meaningful comparison to the standards that teachers are trying to evaluate.
Thanks, Randy. So, who should be designing the assessments? I mean, so is it the teacher? Is it the students? Should they be doing it together? Or how should they go about it when it comes to designing say, socioculturally responsive assessments, or should they be involving parents or the larger community? How would that work, practically?
Yeah, there's a great chapter in the open access book that I mentioned, Socioculturally Responsive Assessment. If people Google that title and then add Routledge, the publisher, they will find that open access volume. And the chapter is by Pohai Kukea Schultz and Kerry Englert, and it is about involving the community in the development of assessment. And it's really a very interesting chapter because from their perspective, involving the community is essential. And they describe the development of an assessment that it's actually a standardized assessment, not a classroom assessment, but it's an assessment that was designed to for measuring the competencies of kids in Hawaiian language immersion programs. The assessment is designed to account for those kids' backgrounds, their interests, their cultural identities, and the ways of knowing with respect to Hawaiian language, science, and mathematics. So that's really a very interesting example that goes a long way to explaining the value of involving the community in the creation of assessments. And you could make a similar case for classroom assessment too, that certainly getting student perspectives and input as well as parent perspectives and input could be very helpful, certainly in understanding better, again, what the context, the lived experience, the interests, the identities of the students are, so that those can be accounted for in the kinds of problems that are posed.
Thank you, Randy. So, what would a message or a message of encouragement be from you to, say, educators in the K-12 sector or school heads who are interested in making their assessment practices more equitable, more reflective of the diverse students that they serve and the diverse needs of those students? So, what would your
Well,
message?
yeah, well, I think my encouraging message would be that this is a very exciting time in which to be teaching. It's exciting because there are many possibilities that one can try out and experiment with. And what makes it exciting is that, at least in the US, school populations are very diverse. Kids are coming from such a variety of different backgrounds. As I mentioned, the majority of kids in US schools are students of color. The majority are coming from low-income environments, and teachers are coming from different environments and different backgrounds. So that's an opportunity to learn. That's an opportunity to engage with different cultures and learn about new things. And if you're a teacher, learning is your job, right? Teaching is your job so that kids can learn, and teachers learn every day from what it is they do.
And looping it back to learning, as you mentioned even in your paper, uh, that assessment should promote deeper learning. So, what are some of the key features or, say, conditions that make assessment tasks capable of encouraging this deeper learning rather than just, say, recollecting information or regurgitating stuff that somebody just knows? So, uh, how do you think teachers should begin or might begin to incorporate these ideas into their existing assessment practices?
Great question. I think there are several ways. One way I mentioned is to include high quality performance tasks, because such tasks call for the deeper thinking involved in applying knowledge and skill and in managing and coordinating that knowledge and skill to achieve a reasonably realistic goal. A second way is to provide consultative resources in the assessment, like those used in real-world problem solving, which encourages students to locate relevant information, interpret it, integrate it, and use it for problem solving. Writing a persuasive or informational essay based on text, video, and audio source materials that are included in the assessment would be an example. A third way is to structure tasks so that they model for students the strategies and habits of mind that proficient performers would use in their practice. An example would be to present on the assessment standards for quality work for students to use in crafting their responses to tasks. For example, a checklist of the characteristics of an effective argumentative essay. The intention is to get students to use such quality standards not only in crafting their response, but to get them to incorporate them as part of their everyday practice, to get teachers to incorporate them into their instructional routines. So those are three ways that I think assessments can be designed to encourage deeper learning.
Thank you for that one, Randy. Coming to this question on your vision for, say, education in the context of, like, say, assessments and innovations in assessments. One, what would you like to see? And two, where do you see, like, assessments in, say, the next 10 years, given what do you call proliferation of AI tools and so many other personalized assisted learning tools that we already have. So where do you see assessments moving towards, and where do you want to see them?
I see assessment moving towards, and I would like to see it go towards personalization. I've written a fair amount recently on personalized assessment, because personalized assessment with equity in mind is really what SCRA is about. SCRA is about adjusting the assessment so that it suits the individual characteristics of the student, the background, the identity, the interests, the prior knowledge. That's what personalization is about. So I think that personalized assessment is the future, and I would like to see it move to that future. Now, what's interesting to me about personalized assessment is that there are multiple paths to getting there. And some of those paths may be more appropriate for some purposes than others, or for some context than others. One such path is machine-driven. So the machine is given all of the information one might have about a student, and then the machine generates an assessment suited to that student. And a simple example I gave earlier was the case of asking generative AI to create a problem for me about baseball, create a problem about linear equations in one variable in a baseball context, or in a musical context, or in a shopping context, or in the context of the history of the U.S. Civil War, or in the context of the history of World War II. So that's an example, a simple example of an AI machine-driven approach to personalized assessment. What I would see happening in the future is that the machine could account for more and more variables about a student, generating problems that were better and better suited to the individual in question. A second approach, which is very different, is examinee-driven. And in the examinee-driven approach, it's more like AP Art and Design or AP Research, in which the student gets to decide for him or herself what characteristics to bring to the assessment and how to use them in the context of the assessment. So the challenge there, or one of the challenges there, is at the design stage how to design the assessment so that it's open enough to allow students to bring their interests, identity, backgrounds, and interests to the assessment in a way that will allow them to show what they know and can do on the competencies that teachers care about. So that's a very different approach. And I see the future as incorporating both of those approaches, sometimes combining them together into a hybrid. AI can help on both sides. So I think it's a very exciting future that we can look forward to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randy Bennett. It was lovely having your thoughts. So, a final message, if you have, like, if you missed out on something that you wanted to share, uh, please do so, and then maybe, we would officially wrap it up.
Okay.
The that we've had. So,
Yeah.
I go to you for any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to share or engage with.
Yeah, I guess my final comments would be first, thank you for facilitating this session so masterfully. It was really very enjoyable and a learning experience for me, as well as an honor and pleasure to take part. So I thank you and the Global Citizenship Foundation for sponsoring this event. And second, just to remind those who may have more recently joined the session that our book, Socioculturally Responsive Assessment, Implications for Theory, Measurement, and Systems Level Policy, is available for free, open access, free to download from the Routledge.com website. Just Google Socioculturally Responsive Assessment and you'll be able to find it. So there should be some chapters there that are of interest to teachers, many chapters of interest to researchers and policymakers and the like. Thank you again.
Thank you. So we would also be sharing at the end in your emails. You might receive links to the copy of the paper as well as the book that Randy has already shared. So as we conclude this insightful and engaging conversation, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Randy E. Bennett for his invaluable insights, contributions, and generosity. Um, in time, expertise, and effort on being part of this engagement with the Global Citizenship Foundation uh, and all our attendees. So I would like to also thank formally our supporting partner for the 29th Educational Leadership Forum for their collaboration in helping advance inclusive and transformative assessment dialogues like what we have today. This is very crucial as we engage in dialogues on transforming education. Thank you so much for all the attendees and members and guest attendees who are attending today and who will be attending the recorded sessions. So you are our reason d'etre, our reason for being. Thank you. It is because of you that we do what we do. So thank you so much for being part of this journey. We really, really appreciate the time, insights, and effort that all of you have contributed to in driving this extremely crucial discussion with Dr. Randy Bennett towards shaping the many futures of education for generations of educators and young people. Do not forget to join us on May 7th for the panel discussion on how can we make assessments more meaningful. See you soon. Until then, take care, stay safe, and spread love and compassion. Our world needs it more.